All right, let me. Is
Oh,
that a little bit better then?
I think so. All right,
Yeah.
guys, complain in the chat if our volume levels aren't perfect for you. Welcome to Red Morning.
Yeah.
Special guest,
Yeah. Okay.
the man who pro bono helps loveless nerds like us, get laid better and earn some money. And Carl and I were kind of talking before. We talk a lot about what's the one you hate? Looks, Money, Game. Eighth episode of that. You were just tired of it. And then I thought, once you're getting laid, what's the nice thing you can do? I don't know, make some money. And as much as I want to opine about drop shipping courses, and I'm sure Corey would love that, I thought, why don't we just talk about what actual people do? And they start a business. And we got three different levels of analysis here. We got me, complete noob, farm boy who has to learn about this stuff. We got Carl. How would you describe yours? Cutthroat something or other? Gordon
All I
Gecko?
want to say is that none of what's being said on this podcast can be considered legal or financial advice. Always consult with a professional who's properly licensed in your area to give this advice, and I cannot be held liable or accountable for any advice given on this podcast.
Yeah. Yes, that.
Yes. What Carl said, and in addition to that, we have not created a client attorney relationship by me speaking and you listening to me on this podcast.
I'm an idiot. If you listen to me, it's your own fucking fault. I'm not very good at disclaimers. But no, seriously though, they are right. You guys, like, this is a bunch of guys talking about starting a business in three different jurisdictions, three different levels of knowledge, and none of us can be accountable. It's the same reason why I don't tell you guys that, like, don't call me fucking coach, and everybody who calls you a coach is a liar, because they're promising accountability they don't have. So take that for what it's worth. Yeah, I got no. I can't think of. Do you think of anything else we need to warn people about before we start running our mouths?
No, I think we pretty much covered it now. I think we should be free. So, oh, wait, one more thing. Continuing to listen to this podcast means you accept the aforementioned terms.
Yes, opting out means leaving the podcast now.
Ooh, I like that. Having said that, if instead of leaving, if you just want to leave the volume down and leave it running in the background, I would appreciate it.
What I'm saying is I've been seeing about like 55, 60 frivolous lawsuits lately from people who don't understand how the law works, and I don't really want to get embroiled in that shit.
In
That's
real
right.
life or online?
It's mostly been happening in real life, but not me personally, but I'm sure everyone else got the joke right, so relax.
Yes, dude. It's like 9 in the morning. I was up late last night. I'm on the cut. I'm tired. Cut me some slack. I guess where I'll start for me, the part I'm curious about, and like you guys have both done business in the States, obviously. I mean, Chesty, you're from there. Carl, you spent some time there. In Canada, we have two ways of registering. For example, an LLC. So we can do provincial or we can do federal. Federal one costs a little bit more. The protections are nationwide. Like if one province decides to steal 4R consulting from me, it's much easier for me to defend my business name than if it was just provincial. Is there like a state federal thing in the states for that as well?
Well, at least when it comes to copyright, I guess that would be the biggest thing for you. Copyright and trademark law.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if somebody were to try to steal that here in the U.S., generally there's state copyright protections and federal copyright protections, and in addition to that, there are what are called common law and statutory protections for both of those things as well. So it all depends on whether or not you um, have an established business, whether you've made the additional leap to register your copyright or your trademark, and how big the damages are. And that would determine where you would sue, under what laws you would sue, and how cutthroat you can be. So, like when people try to do like copyright strikes here on YouTube,
Right.
that boils down to just simply my copyright is registered, meaning it has a number and kind of like a license that corresponds with it with the federal government, and that avails me to statutory damages that are of a set amount, of a set minimum amount. So I can say, hey, you violated 11 of my copyrights based on content, and I want damages for all 11, and the minimum is this amount in the statute. So do the math, pay me this, or I'm going to ask for the same thing and I'm going to sue you in court and also ask for my attorney's fees. And that's the general threat takedown method when it comes to that type of stuff.
That's kind of neat. I don't know what over in am I allowed to say what continent you're on, Carl, or no?
Oh, Africa. Well, it depends a lot because you have a legal concept that I don't know how to pronounce, but it essentially means that there are deals between countries and deals between states, and there are also between the EU, for instance, has them.
Mm-hmm.
You have like some Pan-Asian trade organizations that have them. Basically says, okay, we accept your law. So if this is in accordance with your law, we're going to accept that. So if your company is called this and you have that registered in your trademark registry, we're going to respect that on our end if someone in our country tries to take it from you. But the main difference there is how harshly it's practiced. Like some places are absolute savages with it. And just having something that's similar is going to get you a strike. And some other places you can take the name, as long as the logo looks different, it's cool. So you need to check out what's going on in your specific area for it. Because most countries these days, or at least most countries you want to do business in, have some kind of intellectual/trademark law. It's the same thing with libel laws. It's a good kind of corollary example. Like you have the British libel law, which is basically you can do whatever the fuck you want. And then you have American libel law that's slightly tighter. And then you have some countries where they practice it, short of, posting, Ryan's a dick on every single crosstown bus in Paris. We can't really get you on anything.
Well, yeah. Well, for libel, isn't it? The issue is that it has to be factually incorrect and it has to be malicious. Aren't those like generally the two principles that apply to that kind of thing?
Yeah, generally.
You should check out English libel law, man.
Oh, I guess English would be different. They still got the Queen for fun. Although I guess so do we.
Well, English libel law is so open and wide. It has two cats and is ready to settle down.
Oh, so it's like government policy, or it's like corporate policy. Just vague enough that we can enforce it when we want to find a reason to hammer you.
Exactly.
And we'll see. Canada, I wish I could tell
Mexico-
more about ours, but we're all over the map and we don't seem to follow it half the time. So it's just we're not worth the paper it's printed on.
But then you also have patent law on top of it, which it's not going to come in with trademarks, but it's going to be relevant if you create something that has some kind of uniqueness to it. You might want to check out the patent law, but you want a dedicated patent lawyer for that.
Yeah. Well, and that depends then if you're running, I guess that's the point, back to the business thing. Is your business like an invention of some sort? Did you make the coolest widget? Is it entertainment? Is it an OnlyFans account? Did you decide to become a professional Twitch streamer? Like it's all about like what is it you're offering, and then what extra protections do you need? So I agree. If you make the best coffee mug ever for Red Mornings, then yeah, you're probably going to want to patent that. And then Corey, correct me if I'm wrong. If it's just I'm like my personal one where I'm doing these shows, we have an online channel, we have a certain branding, that wouldn't really, like, patents wouldn't matter so much, but I'd probably want some like copyright infringement. Don't steal my content, or don't steal my branding, that kind of crap.
Yeah, trademark and copyright protection would be what you would be most interested in if you were based in the States. I don't know if there's a strict distinction between those two things in Canadian law or not, but intellectual property in general is the field of law that deals specifically with
Intangibles.
Yeah, well, tangibles and intangibles that can't necessarily be stolen by picking it up and putting it in your pocket, I guess would be the best way to describe it.
Ah.
I think what would hit us the most, though, in terms of those laws, it's copyright law. Because, yeah, trademark comes in with your branding, but all the content you create is technically copyrighted when you make it. But it's really hard to enforce because, like, a lot of places have, like, a satire code in place where it's fair use if it's satire.
Yeah.
Yeah, it becomes copyrighted the moment that it's created and it's also published. but publishing is a weird distinction. It just means that you could show it to 3 people. That means publish. It doesn't have you need to take it to a publisher, or you need to disseminate it to a certain number of people before it's determined to be published.
Well, I think the issue would be more like you have to prove it, right? Somebody could steal your copyright and you could say it's published, but because what's the old lady wisdom where you have to get it postmarked or something from the post office so you at least can show this was published or created on this date, so the copyright could be enforced afterwards. Otherwise, people would say like, "Yeah, I wrote the screenplay for James Bond, of course," and they're like, "Yeah, you just did this in your bathroom on the way to the court case.
Right.
Get the hell out of my office."
Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, getting something notarized before someone and saying, "Hey, I'm taking this to you, and here's a couple of witnesses showing that I produced this on this date." You acknowledge it, and you as the notary are acknowledging that these people saw this, and I'm not lying. That helps. The major thing, though, nowadays when it comes to intellectual property, is Asia just does not care at all about it.
Don't they have, we get to steal your IP as part of their, that's how you come in to do business in our country? You have to give us all of your IP?
Well, it's not even that. It's that thanks for visiting with us and showing your production. We'll get back with you on whether or not we want you to do business in our country. And in the meantime, they've set up another plant pumping out your exact product, a block over after they've looked at your plans and just started to go ham.
Which is absolutely crazy. I'm surprised. What's that, Carl?
Well, for a while, to do business in China as a foreign entity, you had to actually partner with a Chinese company.
Yeah, that was the one.
50 joint venture.
Yes. Yeah, that's still very, very common depending on what province you're dealing with. I've had a number of sporting goods manufacturers deal with China as far as like putting together things in large box stores. And they'll show them a product and say, "Hey, can you make this for half the price?" And they'll say, "Sure." But you have to pair up with one of our large factories here in this particular province, and it has to have a joint venture corporation. And it'll most likely be a Chinese name that no one will recognize, and you won't even be associated with it when it comes to name recognition. But it's kind of understood that those products that are being sent out to, Walmart and Costco and those types of things directly shipped. It's just common knowledge that those are the companies that are making them, even though the only way that you can tell is the branding on the actual outside of the product, not the company's name or anything that's on the outside of shipping. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you guys have it there. Here we have something called No Name Brand, big yellow label, black text, and everybody knows like Kraft Dinner is made at the same factory that No Name mac and cheese is made out of. The only difference is, like you said, the branding label.
Yeah, a lot of cases. One really good example that here's a pro tip, guys. If you like to golf, Kirkland brand, which is kind of like the off Costco brand of different things. Kirkland brand golf balls are almost identical to the most popular high-end golf ball that's played out there. The Titleist Pro V1. Made in the same facilities. The cover is almost identical. Dimple pattern is identical. And they're about $15 to $18 cheaper per dozen. So go out and buy the Kirkland brand golf ball if you want a good deal.
As long as you're not embarrassed by that logo when you're golfing with your buddies, right?
Correct.
Although they're all wearing Kirkland signature sweaters usually.
Yeah. You're out there in Kirkland cashmere hitting the Kirkland ball.
God, I hate Costco.
It's like you're sponsored by Costco.
I hate Costco so goddamn much. I went there yesterday. That's why all my cooking's been white guy cooking lately. And I'm just like, every frumpy Karen, it's like their mecca. and they keep praying 5 times a day to that stupid ice cream little kiosk at the end.
Oh man.
Oh, all right. Tom, thank you for the $5 super chat, by the way. I'm going to be pretty flippant about this. I hope you don't mind. I don't really care. This is your problem, and as an outsider, I find the less I opine on it, the better my life goes. Do you guys have anything you think that maybe?
Yeah, like how can a country with as many prescriptions for OxyContin as the United States be this fucking on edge, guys? Are you all coming down at the same time?
No comment from Corey. Good enough. All right, thank you though for the super chat.
Yeah, it's harder to get those prescriptions filled under quarantine. I think right now. That's part of it. Part of it too is most of the people who are on Oxy are just upping their alcohol intake. So depending on whether or not you're a mean drunk, I think is a little bit relevant in this particular example.
Oh, dude, that would be a whole
Tom,
episode.
to give you a tip though, like I know you hate my takes, but take it from me. Just go off Twitter and all social media and all OAN and all those news for 7 days and go out into the real world, and you'll see there aren't the convoys of Blackwater operatives looking to drag you into a FEMA camp in the streets yet.
I like that. Very hedged. I guess back to the topic here. I got a question for you guys. So when I first started I guess I'll call it a business, whatever, entrepreneur, whatever word you want to throw into it. My first thought was, okay, when do I have to register? Because I'm assuming some kid running a lemonade stand probably doesn't need a business license, although I could be wrong. And it turns out Canada's actually pretty, it's pretty lax when it comes to starting a business. They don't require you to register until you make your first 30 grand in revenue, which I was hoping it would say profit, but it says revenue, which is great because when you're first starting out, you're not going to make anything. And you kind of should start with something that makes money before you start running through all the legal process and that. And I'm curious, does the States do it this way? Because I know, Carl, you made a joke last year about how, you remember those Steven Crowder memes? And you had the one, like 90% of the guys in the sphere haven't paid taxes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but like, if you're in the States, like you're going to
like,
obviously start with the product first. At what point do you guys have to register?
Is there like a lower limit or to that? I don't think there's such thing as having to register unless they catch you.
No, that's what I was going to say, Carl. There really isn't a requirement to register. The corporate form here in the States is more about avoiding individual liability and properly structuring taxes. That's literally all it's for. You can be a drop shipper, here in the States and be a sole proprietor running off from 1099s directly tied to your social security number and never have to get an EIN, form any type of business entity, because all you're doing then is having all of the revenue passed straight through to you, not through a company, and you're taxed individually on all of that income. Unless you can show, expenses for that. But if you're doing drop shipping third party style, where you don't take on any of the logistics and you're simply a pass through for even that, it's like, come to my site and learn how to have everybody else do all the work for you. Then that's completely different. And if you don't have any inventory, you don't have to account for that. So in the end, you're simply receiving a bunch of money from various sources, and
you just count it as income.
Yeah. And then you basically pay individual income taxes based on what you receive.
That's an interesting difference then, because here you have to register because you need your GST or HST or PST numbers depending on what province you're in. So for anything you sell, there's usually goods and services, provincial sales tax, or that harmonized sales tax attached to it. So even if you're a sole proprietorship, as soon as you're taking money for services, then that's a requirement, and that's why they have the $30,000 buffer there, because they don't want to. I guess I should thank Harper for that. So it keeps new businesses from getting crushed when they start out. But that's kind of neat how
Well,
the
it's
states
not
does it
that
though.
well, it's not that uncommon, that specific law that you mentioned there, because I think a lot of more European uh, operating countries have it that way, that up to a certain revenue, it's not really counted as a business. Like, of course, if I was to consult or Chesty practices law, that counts as, that's us doing our business. But let's say if Chest started doing golf pro shit, or if I started selling tables I made with woodworking, that would technically not count as a business under that law until you hit a certain level of revenues. And after that, you have to start accounting for things. And usually there's a grace period there, like anything you bought that we can relate to the business within, usually 12 to 36 months can be counted on that first filing.
Yeah.
But I would
Well,
add, you're getting if you think you're going to do, you can do the math on this depending on your personal tax rate. In my case, for instance, the corporate tax rate is almost 20% lower than what I pay in personal taxes. I would never run company money through my own income as a sole proprietor.
oh, dude, that would be brutal. I mean, put aside the tax side of it. Just imagine the logistics of having to sort through that. Like every expenditure, business is this one. Like at least it's better in that you could pull up electronic forms, but I wouldn't want to add that kind of workload just because I couldn't be arsed to get a second visa or a different business account.
Yeah, and the biggest problem is going to be when you, let's say down the line, if you start wanting to structure this as an LLC, or you start to run a lot of revenue through this, and your taxes haven't been accounted for properly, you don't have good books, and then suddenly the IRS decides to audit you, and you've been kind of finger fucking between private and business expenses, and you've been treating company revenue in an LLC as your own pocket money. That's the type of shit that gets you actually fucked in the ass if the IRS catches you.
Is that an OnlyFans reference, Carl?
Everything's an OnlyFans
It's a
reference.
prison reference.
Yeah, it's just the whole thing is strange. Like I'm surprised how many people do that. Like for me, for example, when I first started, I didn't make a whole separate corporate account right away. All I did was go to the bank. I'm like, make me a separate account. I had two, one in Canadian funds, one in US funds. So then everything goes in there. So then when the time came to move it over to a corporate structure, which technically for me is going to be end of year this year, then I have that single pot. It's completely segregated, and I don't have to worry about any of the logistics around it. And then luckily enough, everything that I have as like a shopping cart that takes revenue has awesome auditing software. So I have everything listed that I need in one nice little spreadsheet. And I'm just surprised that people don't do it because it seems like such a very simple thing to set up. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's also the liability issue, which I think Chesty needs to cover more, because being personally liable versus the LLC being liable are two different worlds.
Oh yeah, because Ribney was talking about that in chat here, where sole proprietors, which is because your name, yeah, I think it's the same for you guys too. Like your name is something you don't have to register. Like you always have it as your sole proprietorship as a business name or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, but the major danger there is just being yourself opens up all of your personal assets to ridicule when it comes to either not paying your taxes, or if something happens to go wrong with whatever it is that you produce, or whatever. People sue you for the dumbest shit sometimes, and if you're going to work in the manosphere, I mean, I could see somebody suing you because you guaranteed something to them as part of your program, and of course it's probably not true, but at the same time, this is still a pain in the ass that you have to deal with directly, and all of those things can add up quickly. And if it's suing yourself, it's too big of a pain in the ass sometimes. But if it's suing your LLC, or that's the only entity that can be sued, then the LLC might not have any assets at all, but some intellectual property, because you're going on a cash in, cash out basis with your accounting.
Right.
And if that's the case, and you're at the end of every year simply doing a distribution to yourself as the final transaction of the year. You start every year out at zero. Um, that's
Can't
an
squeeze
excellent.
blood from a stone kind of thing.
Right, exactly. You say, okay, well, now you defeated and killed my company. Now I'm going to change my name this time to RZD2 LLC from RZD LLC. Congratulations on killing a company that didn't matter. So yeah, I mean it is what it is, and part of it too is it all depends on how certain industries are regulated. Like for me, in order to do my business, I'm required to have a certain type of business entity formed simply because I have certain types of accounts that I must have in order to run my business ethically.
Right.
So the only type of companies that can open up, let's say, an IOLTA account, depending on what jurisdiction you're in, that's an interest only um, trust account for client money. Okay, and what it is if your client comes to you and says, "Hey, I need to hire you," and you tell them, "I'm not even going to discuss this with you unless you give me a $10,000 retainer," you take that money and you deposit it in this IOLTA account until it's actually earned.
So is
Meaning,
that like an escrow?
yeah, it's an escrow account that draws interest, and then that interest is used to fund accessibility for justice for indigent people in most states. So like it'll pull 1 or 2%, and as that money is in there, that interest is siphoned off immediately from the bank over to the trust account for the state bar that runs all of these programs.
Well,
And
that's
then
kind of interesting how that works.
yeah, and then on top of that, you have a separate business account where you run your daily expenses out of your operating account. So your operating account pays all the fees for the IOLTA account if there are any, or any overdrafts. So you have to have pretty much one-to-one funds in one for the other in case something happens and that gets liquidated either by fraud or whatever.
Hmm.
So
I'm assuming there's an insurance that you can get for that, though, or is that?
well, there's malpractice insurance, but there isn't beyond what the federal government will give you for insurance for an account safety. That's only up to a quarter. Well, let's see, maybe $500,000 because there's two accounts there. And I've had in many cases transactions of millions of dollars go through that IOLTA account simply because it just needs to go there before it gets wired someplace else. So I mean, it'll hit that account and sit there for maybe 2 or 3 days while I initiate a SWIFT transfer or something someplace else, because that's just the way that it needs to work. If you don't
Oh,
have
that's right. You guys got Swift down there.
oh, SWIFT sucks. It's
Oh, I know it sucks. Every time in Canada we have to deal with it, I'm like, you guys really need to set something up like Interac.
yeah, it's not very intuitive at all. And trying to do a SWIFT transaction to a Singaporean bank via an American intermediary. So you've got like it hits like 4 different instructions as part of the SWIFT transfer. It becomes anything but SWIFT.
Jesus. Yeah, with Canada, I guess it's because we only have 5 major banks, but between all of them, they're internet connected so well that you can basically send this via email. As long as your bank is aware, like if you're doing, let's say you're doing this for a real estate deal, which is probably the most common example I've seen of that lawyer holding escrow bit.
Yeah.
They might have to call ahead to the bank, say, yeah, there's going to be a transfer of over $10,000 in this account and it's going to this one. So that way the automatic systems that automatically flag that so they don't, so you don't want to have money laundering can let that stuff through. But it's so much better. It works so well that in Montreal, when I first moved there, our lawyer had electronic typewriters to draft up all the data. Have you ever even seen one in an office?
Oh yeah, yeah. The word processor that clangs away as it's automatically printing this piece of crap out. Yeah, Yes, I get
Yeah,
it.
the big IBM logo. I looked at that thing and I'm like, oh
Teletype.
my god.
Yeah, the teletype machine. Absolutely. Megan in the chat has a question about what's the difference between a C corp and an S corp. Okay, well, those are tax designations at the beginning of the formation of a corporation in the U.S. And what you want to um, place your company under has a direct implication for tax purposes. And for one thing, most people don't need an S corp or a C corp in order to run whatever it is that they have. I personally prefer limited liability companies simply because you can do the exact same thing without having to worry about this whole, well, what did I elect as far as taxes are concerned um, between the C corp and the S corp formation. And the problem is that if you form a C corporation, the corporation pays taxes on its income, plus whoever gets paid by the corporation also has to pay income taxes on whatever they receive. So it's called double
Dipping.
taxation.
Oh.
And if you're running an S corp instead, it's a pass through. The corporation itself, the S corporation, doesn't pay initial business taxes. Instead, you or any of the other owners of the company at the distribution at the end of the year, you report the company revenue as personal income instead. That is the difference between the two. And as far as any legal benefits or additional protections that come from an S corp or a C corp, there are none. So it's really not advantageous. And if you are wanting to form a corporation because you want to issue shares instead of having members as you would in an LLC, start with the S corp. Elect S, don't elect C. That would be my advice.
That makes sense. I think I know they have different names in Canada too, but for the life of me, I can't remember what they were. I want to call them like private or public companies, but whatever. I could probably
Well, you
look it
have a
up,
thing
but
in law where in law, a lot of the time it's going to be partnerships instead of LLCs.
well, yeah, but is it the same there as it is here? So for partnerships, you still have the liability. It's just the liability is spread among the partnership, right?
Yeah, correct.
It used to be like that in England, I know, but they changed it in England.
Oh, so you have like a limited liability partnership.
Yes, you can have
Yeah,
LLPs in some states in the U.S. and also in other common law countries. They formed the LLP.
I
well, the
guess,
whole
and
point behind it, it's essentially a lie. Like the whole reason to do it, like from the start, was just to limit personal liability. Because back in the day, if you go back before about 1900, I think, you
Mhm.
didn't have the LLC or the any kind of limited liability. So anything you fucked up, you were personally liable for.
Well, yeah, like if they sue your
And
company, you lose your house.
yeah, exactly. And at that point, they put that in to kind of prevent that from happening. But that had the opposite effect to begin with, because what happened then was these people were doing huge ass pyramid schemes. I can't remember the name of one, but you had one in England that's really well known. So
Right.
that introduced a lot of regulations to, like, if you're a board member in an LLC and you can be proven to be negligent, you can actually be held personally accountable despite the LLC designation.
Oh, I've heard of that, but isn't that the case where? Oh, damn it! Conrad was it Conrad Black was like the big notable case in Canada for that. Well, I guess in England too. Am I getting the name right? Is that who you're talking about, or
No, this is way older, I think.
oh,
This
way
is
older?
back in like the yeah, it's in 1880, I think. I just can't remember the name of the South Sea something, I think. The South
Ah,
Sea scandal in England.
man, something about companies that have like nautical terms in their names in England causing a lot of trouble. Like the what was the other one? The Indian Ocean or East Indian Trading Company.
Oh yeah, I got the dates wrong. It's actually 1700s.
Interesting.
But there was a lot of shady things. Like one of the things that's come since like the Great Depression was like companies now actually have to give out annual reports and quarterly reports, which they never had to do like back in like 1910.
Ooh, that's another thing too. So if you're going to incorporate, you do have to keep, at least in Canada, you have to keep minutes and have quarterly reports if you, depending on how it's structured. So there's always a bit of administration that comes with this every year, like doing your homework. So if you're the lazy kind of guy and your liability, like you don't have a pot to piss in anyway, I don't know if incorporation, like, is the liability really much as an issue? But then again, if you're that lazy, why are you even starting a business? I don't know.
Yeah, Ripley had a good question. Like the tax implications make it better to remain a sole proprietorship until over 100K income. Jess, do you want to comment on that?
What was that? I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, I know
No,
Ridley's
Ridley had
Canadian.
the
He's saying the
question.
Oh, here, I'll put it up. So I know you don't have to until 30 grand revenue, even though they suggest you do it right away, just because then you're in the thick of things. But from most pub or private sources I've seen, they say that most businesses don't even start until about 50K revenue. But I'm kind of curious, like tax implications. I don't think there is any tax implications.
Well, I've kind of explained my stance on it because, like, if you're in a country with progressive income tax, which I think is like all of them,
Yeah.
if you're running this as a side hustle and you have a day job that actually pays you a decent wage,
Right.
that progressive tax can do a lot of damage. If let's say you get 30 grand's worth of extra income, that'll bump you up a tax bracket or two in some cases.
But then that would be a reason to incorporate, would it not? Because then you could start expensing things.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a major reason to do it.
Yeah, that's a major reason to do it. And in the U.S., they made it super simple over the past 4 years. This is one of the things that Trump fans are actually kind of proud of and look at as progress. They have a simplified deduction for small businesses where you don't have to necessarily itemize to the nth. They'll kind of just assume that a certain amount of your um, income is going to be offset by expenses of running the business, and they kind of just bake it in if you make this selection.
Is that a good thing, or is that?
Well, it's good. It's good if you're an OnlyFans hoe and you haven't been paying any attention at all. And it's either get taxed for the whole amount or put something fraudulent on your return. You can just say, well, I'm not necessarily sure how much I made this or how much I had in expenses this year. I'll check the box for taking the standard deduction for a small business. So your Schedule C then passes through the IRS without any difficulties because it takes the edge off of the administrative burden of having to audit all of these people.
Yeah, which makes sense. Which I guess works out for the government in the end. They make more money because more people are compliant.
Yeah, like I'll bet you $10 that the government is making a profit off that because most people are getting less deductions when they do the checkbox as opposed to actually doing their books.
Yeah, but they're not illegally running their business or whatever. So it's
right. So the trade-off is you're not going to get as good of a tax avoidance result, but you are better insulated against the possible audit. So I mean, you got to take that into consideration. If you're lazy and you just want to literally lay on your back all day, that seems to be a better accounting strategy in many cases than spending 4 hours at the end of your day tallying up all of your tips and then figuring out what you spent on laundry and toys and lingerie expenses. So
dude, it's funny you mentioned tips because in Quebec they actually had that. So for waiters and waitresses, all like the typical occupations, they actually switched for that same reason to like a mandatory thing where they just assume that 20% of your that you're going to get 20% extra income over base salary because of tipping, and they just tax you assuming it's there. And my God, Quebec, for as much as everybody loves talking about like the free healthcare and all the government services and that, they run the most taxes in the country, the most regressive taxes in the country, and 50% of all federal payments go to them. I am absolutely amazed that like they're so desperate for tax revenue that they tax people making minimum wage 20% above and beyond. Like, it was the most amazing thing I've ever seen. That's why I was curious. I'm like, there's no way this can be a good thing for business people.
Well, no, again, it like Carl said, the best way to go about something if you're going to institute a new quote unquote time saving device for the undereducated business owner is to shield liability from the tax collecting agency while pulling in more revenue than would normally be garnered if you did your due diligence. I mean, well, Ribney has it right in his comment in the chat. He says, um, automatic deduction comes out as a minimum, but if you do the paperwork, you could claim more. Absolutely, you could. It boils down to how much time are you willing to do, or are you willing to hire somebody else to do that work for you? And once you get a certain size, it makes sense to have professionals look at that for you instead of taking the quick way out, 4 days before your filing deadline. You're like in the middle of April and, oh shit, I got to pay taxes. And what
Yeah,
should
well,
I
that
do?
means but that's like the business decision too, right? How much does an accountant cost versus how much are you leaving off the table by not registering it, or the opportunity cost if I want to
Paid
spend
my
30 hours doing this versus how much tax am I saving?
Right, but to be
paid
frank,
my
I mean,
account about 10 grand this year.
yeah, I mean, but to be frank, your standard, Mona V retailer or other multi-level marketing person out there selling purses and Tupperware. I mean that person's not going to take the time to go through all of that difficulty, and a lot of it too is just, again, you're right. A lot of people's businesses, quote unquote businesses, are really side hustles, and they're not actual businesses that they run as their sole source of income.
Well, I think this is kind of a good segue into like the next note I made for the show: necessary infrastructure. Because all that stuff that Chesty was talking about, I've been talking about now, that can be done 90% automatically for you if you get the right software for it and you organize things correctly.
Insert ad for QuickBooks here.
No, but like any payment provider worth their salts can give you exactly how much you've charged people for over a year. That gives you basically your revenue if you run everything through them. And then for costs, it's not that complicated to, depending on what you do, you can always keep either electronic invoicing, or if you're in the US, I think it comes on parchment written with like a fountain pen.
Off the blood of slaves, yeah.
Like, I'm sorry. Like I start all these shows with like, I'm not gonna rag on the US, and then I remember like now, like they still have fucking checks there.
What? You guys have checks? I bet you spell them CK, don't you? Not even the QU.
Oh yeah, no, we have checks, and unfortunately, many times businesses deal with the issues of 3-party checks, 2-party checks.
Is that the one where you sign your check over to somebody else with like your signature on the back?
No. When like in the case of a legal settlement here in the U.S., I'll get this big ass check sent to me that's made out to me and my client, and then I have to explain to my client, oh, you see this whole huge amount of money right here? Mm-hmm. You're going to get about maybe 40% of this. And they're like, why? And well, because I have all
because my name's on the other side.
Well, they will not. Yeah, well, not only that, it's like, well, here's all my expenses. This is everything that I've done in this case up to this point. You haven't paid a bill fucking once. These are all of the fees that I needed to pay out to experts in order to make this case feasible. And then here's our agreement here that says that after all of my fees and expenses are paid, I still get a percentage of whatever it is that you get as an award. So shit like that makes it difficult. And every company knows that we have our own ethical standards that we have to abide by when it comes to doling out end amounts to recipients of rewards or settlements. So if they would just cut the check to my IOLTA account, my client trust account, and then have me itemize it out, pay myself, and then hand a check from that account over to my client, shit would be made easier. But no, this is the same shit all the time. It happens all the time. They just want to throw a wrench in essentially between the attorney who's doing the work and the client who may or may not be receiving all or a portion of that check.
Is that just like a pettiness from the other guy? You know what? They can have it, but I'm gonna make them earn it, or is that just the cost of doing business?
It's the cost of doing business, but the point is that business shouldn't be done that way. All they should have to do is click 3 buttons and have it wired directly into my account, and then I deal with it from there.
Oh, you got to come to Canada, man, because that's what happens.
Yeah, well, see that's the problem here. It doesn't, because what we always want on top of everything is a paper trail to go along with whatever transactions occur. Unless, of course, it's our country printing money, in which case you hit 3 buttons and money printer go brrr, and that's the end of it. So that's the major problem that we have at this point. It isn't an inability to use the technology in order to make banking easier for the individual. It's a choice not to.
Oh, fair enough.
It has everything to do with regulations on our end, and the fact that they always put certain obstacles that allow for arbitrage on the bank's parts, and also allows for greater degree of tracking of transactions on the government's part, because everybody who has transactions of $5,000 and above in this country is assumed to be trafficking in drugs or in terrorism, and must be watched at all times.
Oh yeah, the long arm of that Patriot Act, right? Or was that before that?
Well, I mean, we just have agencies that are specifically set up for the sole purpose of tracking large transactions, anti money laundering agencies.
Oh, fair enough.
Oh yeah,
Well,
don't
yeah,
get me started on that bull crap dealing with like the new anti-money laundering regulations. It's like I had to call my bank, like, hey guys, just a quick question. I got this like form I have to fill out from you guys, but I've been a customer here for 30 years. So you're trying to tell me you have no idea who the fuck I am?
Oh yeah. 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 Yeah, I had a bankruptcy settlement that went through. This was 2 years ago, and one of the companies that I was working for was a sporting goods manufacturer based just outside of Beijing, and they basically they were the largest debtor in this particular bankruptcy, and they were owed a huge chunk of whatever had been paid for up to that point. And the trustee sent me the check, in their name, dropped it into my IOLTA account, and then I set up a SWIFT transfer to them. And my bank calls and says, "Okay, well, why did you send this money over to China?" It's like, well, because I have a Chinese client that is owed the money. Well, did you get prior authorization? I said, well, the bankruptcy trustee is part of the Treasury Department, which is part of the Secret Service in the United States. I think that would be enough permission for me to receive the money and transfer it someplace else.
But I'm guessing they don't talk with the Secret Service, so they have no idea what you're talking about.
No, but I mean, you get 4, like Carl said, I get 3 different interviews from 3 different people to see if my own story checks out as to why I sent, $800,000 from my client trust account over to Asia, and my simple answer was because it's not my money.
Well, I think I have a story that'll top that one, because one of my clients a while back, I'm not going to go into specifics, they were owed a fairly large amount from a Chinese company. Or rather, one of their contractual partners was owed a great deal of money from a Chinese partner, and that contractual party couldn't pay his bills until the Chinese paid up. But Beijing has some funny rules about sending money out of China. You're not really allowed to, you're not supposed to do that, to quote someone. And at one point, the other guy was like, came to our office. He pulls out a fucking suitcase full of dollars, and he was like, I had to fly to Beijing, get the money in cash, smuggle it back, and get it through 2 arriving airports before I could come here and pay you.
Jesus.
Because there's something about that you're not allowed to. Like the Chinese currency is the one, so you're not supposed to transfer over a certain amount out of the country, and that works both individually and in aggregate. But there's a huge black market for currency over there.
Well, isn't that why the was it the Shanghai, the gambling buildings and all that are such a big deal? Because that's kind of how they do it.
Oh yeah, but North Korea, they have a huge setup too, like with all their embassies, selling all kinds of things from tobacco and alcohol to hard drugs. Supposedly,
In North Korea,
allegedly.
Well, that's not very nice.
But to side note, it just kind of struck me. There's one more thing that's kind of a significant thing with the LLC versus the sole proprietorship. You can hire yourself into your own company and pay yourself a salary, or you can pay yourself dividends. And the implications of that vary a bit from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Usually dividends have a fixed kind of tax rate to it. So if you're already in like one of the top marginal tax brackets, it's beneficial to do dividends. But also with the type of, if you have any kind of like earned social benefit based off your salary from the state, then it's usually best to do that as salary until you reach the max and then switch to dividends.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if that's relevant to Canada or the States, really.
Yeah, the main thing is if you are in any type of business formation is to never intermingle your personal and corporate money until it's been determined that those corporate funds are being converted to personal funds, whether it's through wages, dividends, or a year-end distribution, which I like to do for myself because I simply like to run every year's books starting at zero in the operating account, keeping my hands off the trust account of clients' funds. So that always works for me easily. But for some organizations, if you are continuing to pay other experts or you have to have other people on hire on an ongoing basis, you can't do that. So you either have to figure out what it is that you can take out in order to keep your business operating properly, or in Carl's case, pay yourself dividends throughout the year as the top shareholder of your company or the managing member of the company, and do it that way, or pay yourself a salary, in which case you're just going to pay ordinary income on that as it comes through, and then you can write it off as an expense as to the company on the back end.
That's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's essentially the kind of like financial engineering I was going to talk about in tax planning that we talked about before the show, where you kind of want to set it up. Like you can also do what Apple does, which is you set up a subsidiary in like
Ireland,
some
isn't it?
kind of low tax haven. Like Cayman Islands is popular. You have a couple others that are popping up.
Turks and Caicos, the one for Canada.
Yeah, and they own the intellectual property of your company, and the main operating company that generates the revenue rent that intellectual property from the other company. So the company operating in a high tax zone can actually expend the amount paid in licensing fees to the company in the low tax haven, and you just set those fees to use the intellectual property so high that the other company barely breaks even.
Yes.
You can even engineer pre-tax losses in order to make use of can't remember the English terms for it, but it's essentially if your company has been running, let's say you start a new company and you're losing money for the first 4 years. Sometimes you get a carry forward on the loss.
Yeah, it's called
after you incurred the loss.
It's literally called loss carry forward.
Yeah, I knew it was something like that. I just couldn't find the term in my head suddenly.
I think it's the same here, but for here, I think it's 3 years that you're allowed to, at least in Ontario. I'd have to double check if federal's the same if you incorporate with them.
Well, like I was part of a merger at one point, or rather, it was called a merger. It was in reality a hostile acquisition. But the main asset they were after in the other company was essentially a huge ass loss carry forward.
Yeah. Yeah, the ability to use debt to lower your tax liability in future years is important. That's one of the things that people didn't understand about Trump's tax records.
Yeah.
Was that, oh, you only paid like $750 in taxes that 1 year. Yeah, because he was carrying forward losses from years during the recession where he wasn't making any money and applying them to income from that particular year. I mean, don't bitch at the person, bitch at the system that created that particular opportunity for someone to avoid current tax liability for tougher prior years.
Dude, I remember he was saying that in 2016 where everybody's mad at him. He's like, don't get mad at me. That Clinton chick, she's the one that passed the law. I just use it, and I'd be stupid not to. That one always made me laugh. I miss 2016 Trump. He was much funnier than 2020 Trump.
Yeah, but this is also kind of the discussion I keep getting into with people who don't actually know about this shit.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think it's something that people should learn about, not because they want to exploit it, because I think it's something that we have to actually fix.
Yeah.
Because I'm sympathetic to loss carry forward because it kind of mitigates taking risk, and it, like, the ideal thing with the tax system is that when you have like the boom years, you should pay more taxes. When you have shitty ass years, you should pay less taxes. And if you're normally, let's say pre-corona, if you had a well operating business that was paying taxes every year that had a profit, and that got eroded during corona and you're now running at a loss, it's not like a net positive to have that business bankrupt as opposed to being able to survive through to continue to pay taxes afterwards.
Oh, I 100% agree. That should be the primary, well, I guess from a Canadian perspective, the primary purpose of government from a business perspective is to smooth out that giant curve up and down the economic cycles. Although we'll see, I don't know, it doesn't seem to be going that way. Now it's just like the oil rigs, man. It used to be guys when oil was expensive would save money, and then when oil dropped to $30 a barrel, people would spend to keep everything afloat. But it just went the opposite way. When things went good, people were buying $200,000 trucks, and then when things got bad, they petitioned to the government to bail them out. And that seems to be like the theme across the board when it comes to business. And honestly, from a game perspective, I don't know what you can do other than take full advantage of every loophole you can and exploit the shit out of it. Because it's kind of like playing by the rules while nobody else is. You know what I mean?
No, but I completely agree with you. You have to do that. And like the system is kind of rigged to make you do that. It's like we had a talk about like I think it was Enron that had the largest code of conduct of any company that's ever been audited in the United States. And everyone who followed it got fired, and everyone who broke it got promoted and got bonuses.
Ignore what she says, watch what she does. It's amazing how it all comes back to game at the end of the day.
So I think it's important. I think that's a major role of government. It's just one of those questionable situations where should someone be able to get away with $750 of income taxes? Well, I don't make moral judgments, but from an economic perspective, I would rather someone pay $75,000 in taxes as opposed to put another gaudy fucking golden toilet in his penthouse. And it's like, I don't mind the standard of living. I just abhor the lack of taste and class.
But that's like the American way, isn't it? That kind of like, what does everybody else find sophisticated? Well, not here. Let's get some monster trucks here with some gold-plated tires. Throw bacon on it. Call it a day. This is high class. No, I guess no offense, Chesty. I guess we're shitting on his culture. He's sitting over there staring at his gold toilet like these motherfuckers.
I'm actually broadcasting from my gold toilet, so I don't care. That's fine.
Yeah, hate what you want. We got freedom. Excuse me now while I put on my mask.
No, but I think that's going to be one of the, like, to kind of take this into trends. I think what we're going to have to see going forward it's just you're going to see more and more homogenization between financial laws across countries, because like any company that does business with with a stock market noted company in the States have to go through the fucking Sarbox bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
Any company that operates in the UK have to abide by the Cadbury Code, which isn't like a regulations, it's more of a set of suggestions. But
Yeah.
if you don't follow it, you have to justify why you're not following it, and all this pain in the ass regulation that one company may have to do across 15 jurisdictions. And then you have cross-border frictions like with Chesty and his Chinese client, or whenever you're transferring funds in and out of Russia. And it's just a pain in the ass, and it adds a lot of extra costs that are not actually worth having there.
Yeah. Oh, wait. Just wait till you have to deal with a Crown Corp, where the Treasury Minister is the sole shareholder, and then you have to add that whole, like, imagine that your only shareholders are government, and then having to deal with a company there. It's a huge pain in the ass, because the government basically gives them monopoly-like powers, monopoly light, I call them. Like the airlines are a great example, at least until they privatized it. Bell, like you were talking about that offline too, Chesty, with Canada's phone company. For the longest time, it was like that was it, the national company. You didn't even buy phones; you rented them from the Crown Corp. I guess back to the thing here. Oh, sorry, you were talking. That's. Oh,
No,
go ahead.
there's a good thing in chat here now. It's like Alpha Sloth had a good comment. Tax accountants will lobby against tax simplification. It's the Rich Cooper dilemma.
Oh, wait. Oh, wrong one.
And-
I thought you were talking about the flat tax.
Yeah, and the reason why that's such a great comment is like you should never get like let tax accountants write the tax law. You should never let lawyers actually write legislation, because they'll do it in a way that only they can understand in order to keep themselves in business.
Yeah, well, isn't that the argument? Is that, well, these people know this stuff, so you want the experts advising? Trust the experts. Isn't that the theme of 2020? Trust the experts. But I agree. That's the problem.
Yeah, you can always trust experts, but it's just a question of, are they using their expertise for good, or are they some evil scum just out for themselves?
I'd say it's probably actually. You know what? I'd almost think at that level where you're changing legislation, you're probably sociopathic enough to rise to the top. So it's almost like a case where you just have to assume they're bad actors. I don't know, Chesty, for your profession here, am I off base or?
No, I mean,
Nope.
the whole point is, in many cases, is never to cut off your nose to spite your face. I mean, any type of quote unquote reform. I mean, I'm using the really big air quotes here for reform.
Uh-huh.
When it comes to anything, whether it's tort reform or tax reform, none of those things actually end up solving the problem. All they do is give a little bit of an edge to one side of the equation or the other. Accident litigation is a really good example of that. Most quote unquote tort reform basically means that we're going to write laws that make it more difficult for the individual to sue corporations. That's literally what that means. Or to recover lower amounts or have capped amounts of recovery against these corporations. Okay. So when everybody says, "Oh, the cost of everything baked in is due to all of these people suing, and we need tort reform," yeah, tell them to shove that up straight up their ass, because what it does to you as an individual is it gives you less opportunity to, be compensated in the event that you're harmed by one of these large companies. But you never also want that reform to go so far in one direction that there's never any redress for anybody. Because then if that happens, it takes away an entire industry, because defense attorneys need plaintiffs' attorneys, and plaintiffs' attorneys need defense attorneys. And that means that
you can't wipe out your competition.
Well, that's the whole point, is that it's a double-edged sword. Do you want to solve the problem, or do you want to preserve the institution? And that is one of the things that everybody, particularly in office, because the majority of those people are former attorneys or know a bunch of attorneys or are lobbied by attorneys. Trial attorneys need work, and the best way to continue that is to keep the status quo for the most part and argue for the access to justice, as opposed to the insulation of companies from liability. And if you go too far in one direction or the other, you end up either crippling companies from being able to do business because they're liable for doing anything, or you disable the ability of the consumer to seek redress from the corporations, and then they run roughshod over all institutions. So it's a delicate balance.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I remember because I always talked about that where everybody, it's usually like, no offense to the Americans, but like American libertarianism where it's like, don't touch me, I'll do what I want. And I always remember back in like the Victorian times, they used to put alum and borax into flour and into milk because borax got rid of that sour taste to it. But the problem is it's borax and it's killing you. And it actually made, and then alum made the wheat brighter without having to go through the expense of bleaching the flour. And that was how the cottage industry ran for years, but just basically because of that, like that's why protections were put in place. And you're right, if it goes too far the other direction, nobody can fix it. But I definitely don't want to go back to having to wonder what's in my flour or not having nutritional information on food.
Now I've been triggered. I see one of the funniest things in my profession in the chat right now. It looks like we've got a sovereign citizen in the chat.
Oh, no way.
Somebody who believes that the UCC is the end all be all of the law in the United States, and that the U.S. is a corporation and not a country. Oh,
well, I'll just say this: like, even if he's right, is that enforceable?
You translate that to those of us who aren't part of the freedom contingent.
Oh, isn't that essentially where the U.S. is an opt-in thing?
Yes, pretty much. Where you see these traffic stops all the time, where somebody says, "I don't need a license because I'm a sovereign citizen and I did not opt in to be a member of the United States corporation, which is run by the Uniform Commercial Code and not by the Constitution." And they clog up the courts, cause spectacle.
Where these crackpots come from?
Go ahead.
They watch too many westerns. They think it's the Wild West. Back when, all right, government's in my face, I'll just keep traveling west.
Well, like one of my things has been like the social contract is a big thing. Like everyone who lives in this area lives under like this social contract, and we accept the law of the land. You can change them through these mechanisms, but you can't say like, fuck you guys, I'm out. I'm taking my ball and I'm going to start my own country in my apartment. You can't really do that. And
No, not without an army.
And I've kind of been mixed on that because like whenever you have a constitution, that's the foundational document of any state is a form of constitution, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And then every other law that comes after is sort of a clarification on the concept, but they have to work within that framework set in that constitution. Like if you put in your constitution that you're not allowed to drink alcohol in this country, you're free to work to change it, but you can't just start slamming beers left and right.
Yeah. I mean, but part of the issue is that you may not consent to be a citizen of where you're born, but by you continuing to live there, you consent to it.
Well, that's like a child saying, "I didn't consent to have you as my parents," but they're still liable for you, and they're going to control you.
I didn't ask to be born, guys. Holy shit.
Yeah.
Schwartz in the chat asks, "Is there anything in any free country?" Anything in any country comparable to the U.S. as far as free enterprise is concerned? Yeah, I would say that there are some city-states out there, large, especially in Asia, that are very comparable and in some cases easier to work with when it comes to lower amounts of regulation. They're autocratic in the way that they run their own little economies, but as far as opportunity is concerned, Singapore is probably one of the most free and able to be entered into markets that I've ever seen.
Which is probably why they have like the highest real estate prices in the world too, isn't it?
It's a fantastic place to do business. The red tape is very low. Your ability to make money is very unimpeded by useless regulation. It's one of the most, if not the most, financially libertarian places that I've ever dealt with.
All right.
Well, and that's kind of why I actually liked that when Trump was running. He had this whole slogan like, if you want to put in one new regulation, you have to get rid of two. And I kind of agree with that statement because at one point I was looking it up and because I was going to make a joke because like everyone always gets in my mentions like, yeah, America is the freest country on earth. And I was going to look up how many total laws do the United States have on the books that are still active because I was going to make a joke akin to like, okay, how free can a country with 100,000 laws be? But I kind of found out that even the United States Department of Justice doesn't know how many laws are actually on the books. They think it's somewhere in the 20,000 range, I think.
Is that why every now and again some court case will reference a 1789 law that nobody's ever heard about, but for some reason it's applicable to this very niche circumstance?
Well, it's some states still. I think sodomy is illegal.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. There are a lot of laws on the books that are just simply legally unenforceable now because of later court decisions, but it doesn't mean that they've been pulled from the books. I mean, I know a lot of states because of the way car technology worked here in the Midwest, where they were instituting laws state by state as to what was required to be on a vehicle in order to have it on the road. A couple of the states I'm very sure of had laws that required windshield wipers before they required windshields. So I mean, a lot of it's just dumb shit. A lot of it. I mean, you just have to take it all with a grain of salt.
Well, that's kind of the difference between common law and Germanic law, though.
Well, common law is essentially anything that was done in the Pax Romana leading up to the British Empire that spilled over into countries that are from that lineage, and they're natural laws that are more John Locke than they are people writing laws, and they're just assurances of basic things. The main thing that's good about American law is that most of the big ones are negative rights, meaning that the government can't do certain things to you. The government itself isn't granting people certain permissions.
Oh, is that the natural right thing?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's basically inalienable rights that they're not given to you by government. They're given to you by the supreme being or the god, spaghetti monster, nature, whatever.
Yeah.
And that always seems to work out a lot better than the European system, where they write a law for every time you touch your dick, and which hand you can hold it with, and whether or not it needs to be held like a European cigarette, or if you can have the thumb up or thumb down. And that's the thing that I don't like about most code countries is that every hypothetical is basically set to a flow chart. And whether or not a crime's been committed, as opposed to in unique circumstances applying, and it makes for some weird decisions.
Oh yeah, I thought one of the more interesting court arguments I heard recently, I think it was in the UN, because there was a debate around drug legislation. Is charging non-violent drug offenders for buying and using drugs technically against the UN Declaration of Human Rights?
Oh, Canada didn't sign on to that, so we don't care. Because apparently our treatment of the indigenous peoples is really bad if we agree. So yeah, we're like, I don't know. We're gonna pull in America and just veto this.
Yeah, it's kind of like the like Turkey. It's like, what genocide in Armenia? What's this Armenia thing you keep talking about? We've never heard of it.
Yeah.
You want to talk about an opt-in, ad hoc, meaningless organization? The UN is it.
Yeah.
There really isn't any bigger organization of virtue signaling and meaningless bullshit than the UN.
And it was set up that way too, with the 5 permanent members of the council. They got like Russia, China, America, and not any. Basically, any one of them can veto anything else. So it's a giant crab bucket where anything anybody suggests, if it makes any one of the other countries look even slightly bad, they're gonna be like, no. And the U.S. has been running the charge on that one with everything. I don't care.
No. If you want the most ridiculous thing, it was when Saudi Arabia was put on the count as head of the Council for Human Rights.
Oh
Yeah. Yeah, it's basically we've got excellent human rights for about 48% of our population.
That was like giving Obama the Peace Prize for bombing people, but doing it with style.
But like kind of doing it while black. But my interpretation of the whole thing is just like the whole reason why they set up things like the UN and the EU. It's just a way of take the countries that are most likely to beat the shit out of each other and be like, okay, we'll give you like 73% of what you're asking for. Just don't start killing motherfuckers.
Mm-hmm. All right, I guess we'll go back on topic here too. I really wanted to hit this one here, the I am the Nines chat. And I'm curious about your guys' perspective from like Europe and the States. So for example, in Canada, she wants to start, I think it's she. One's shea butter skincare brand, the other one's toys and kinky furniture. Now, I don't know much about the kinky stuff, but I will say the cosmetics. In Canada, it's like starting any other business. Make your product, try and sell your product, wait till you hit 30 grand in revenue. But health-wise, there's the Food and Drugs Act and the cosmetic regulations therein. Luckily enough, Canada actually has all these laws on like the justice.gc.ca site. And you just go through there and make sure you're compliant with everybody. Not that you can't sell if you're not compliant, but just realize once you get to a certain point, it draws attention, and then this stuff will be checked. Although you see companies every day that are way bigger than you'd figure who get away with this stuff. But it's almost like, and what was her question here? Like, how do I start? I would suggest read the FDA. I mean, you're already reading books. It's just one more book. Yeah. Legalese in Canada is not too bad either, at least compared to the States. I don't know. What would you guys have for this?
Well, first off, you have to figure out what your product is going to be, or what your line of products are going to be, and what the regulations are regarding those products. Because if it's cosmetic, it's going to be governed by the Food and Drug Administration because it's not medicine. But it does provide some type of therapeutic benefit. You're going to rub it on your body, so it will be consumed by a person in some way or another. So like vitamins and everything else, they don't fall under medicine because they're not for the explicit treatment or prevention of a disease. So therefore, it all falls under food. So the FDA will be the place to go and figure out what it is that you need to do regarding getting approval of your cosmetic product. Okay. Mm-hmm. And then from there, once you receive some type of approval, or you figure out what the approval is, I would then set up an LLC for that company. Probably get a logo for it if you would like, and then go through the process of getting it approved. Because on all of your applications for those types of things, you're going to have an entity to go along with that. You can't say, well, I want approval as, I am the Nine as an individual, because then that's not going to make sense to the bureaucracy that's going to be dealing with this. It's like, okay, well, you're one person, you want to get this approved. I mean, where are you going to be making this? In your basement? That type of thing. And because you have those types of restrictions, that's always a really difficult point of entry for that type of product.
You're doing whippets over there, Carl?
Yeah, I mean, or what you could do is, if you know somebody already who makes it as a corporation and you simply want to brand it, then that's simply then just relabeling other people's things, and they already have all of that stuff done for you. But I don't think that's probably what you want to do. Same thing with the sex toys. Are you building, small motors in your basement stuck into phallic-shaped objects, and you want to market a brand new product based on, your improved, masturbatory aid? Or are you going to simply purchase from other brands out there that are done on a wholesale basis, make them pretty in some way, and then resell them. And if that's the case, then you have a completely different business model from that as well. So you either get a store, you can do that online very easily, but a lot of this depends on whether you're going to have employees or not. Do you have other family members working on this with you? Do you have other collaborators? And that's why you might want to talk to both an accountant and a business planning attorney to see exactly what you need for what it is that you want to do.
Well, here's my question for you then. So I see a lot of people that are on like Facebook Marketplace or just Etsy with their homebrew stuff. They're probably not selling a lot anyway, because that's my thought. Like, you can go through all of that, which legally is very responsible. But if nobody buys your product, then you're essentially just wasting effort. Is there any kind of like a buffer where, okay, just do your research into it? If you can sell 5 bottles on Etsy and then go through this process here, like obviously you can't suggest somebody do that because you have to suggest that, go through the legal process. That's why it's there. But I have seen a lot of people do it.
I would say, like, the first thing you do before you do any, like, I agree completely with Chesty and the process he just outlined.
Yeah.
But before you even get started on that process, try and get an idea of how big is the market, how much could you realistically get into it. Because there's no point in, like, I was reading an interview with an author I've been reading off and on, and he was like, the first book he ever wrote, he put $2,000 into like cover design, marketing, and printing up author copies he could give away and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Before even checking if there was a big market for it. Because he was like, I have 700 friends on Facebook. They'll all buy a copy. No one did. So I would kind of advise into try and figure out, like, you're getting into with the cosmetics, you're getting into probably one of the most competitive and highly regulated markets in the world. It's extremely competitive, and just having an idea around it, like how much could you realistically sell? Like, how are you planning to sell it? Like, if you're planning to having a physical shop, then okay, how much foot traffic are you getting? How traffic in your area what the hell are you doing? Are you doing the rippets now, Chesty?
Sorry, I saw a dust bunny on my on the edge of my computer here, and I scraped it off with my nail. That's what that horrible noise was.
Oh, fair enough.
I was going to say, like, you want to, like, I'm always a big fan of doing the market research first because it doesn't really cost you anything to go, and you're not taking on long-term costs to do it. Like, same thing with sex toys. Like, what are you bringing to the market that's a unique thing? How are you going to compete with the big people already in your industry that have all the logistics, all the permits, all the infrastructure in place, and just work from there? Because genuinely, I don't think cosmetics is a good industry to get into as a producer / seller. I think it would be much better to establish as some form of reseller, because at that point your concern is just driving traffic and having some kind of highly appealable sales method. Same thing with sex toys. Like, most people aren't comfortable going in and buying the St. Andrew's cross at High Street. You kind of have to do that online or through the mail. So if you do that first and you figure out, okay, if I had 10,000 of this thing, how am I going to sell it? And then once you've kind of come up with a logical, rational, and sound way of doing that, then you move on with the process Chesty outlined.
Well, that's why I was thinking of branding as kind of the more important one. Like, I'll use my book for example, which it sold well. It hasn't been great, but it's apparently top 10% in like Kindle. Most books don't sell very much. Writing the book was, and that's going to be usually equivalent here for like making shea butter or whatever. That was a whole process in and of itself, doing the work, as Rich would say it. But I'm like, nobody's going to read this just because it's the greatest book ever if nobody knows who it is. And I think Rob put it best when he goes, I bought it because I liked you as a brand, and then I found out the book was pretty good too. I would argue for a lot of this stuff, building your brand is another one of those, along with the market research, is one of those free things you can do. Because let's say you build your brand as like, Dr. Shea Butter. It's awesome. Whatever, emotional, resonant message you want to give, whatever narrative story. you want to give is great. So then if you find out, well, shea butter's not the thing, but, you know, a certain type of shampoo is even better, your brand is much easier able to move into a new market when you find out your market research goes well. And then I find if you start that way as opposed to, and then the legal stuff, while equally, like, more important, I would argue, do it afterwards. You at least then know that any of that legal expense and effort you put in isn't going to be wasted on something nobody wants. But you're also flexible enough that if the market research shows that you're on a dead end, you can pivot to somewhere else and you don't have to start from scratch again. That's my 2 cents on it. Although,
Yeah, like
from a liability standpoint, I would assume that it's more of a riskier way to do things than like the way that Chesty recommended first, which I'll grant that's up to you to decide your risk tolerance, right?
well, not to be a dick, but you don't really want to be the guy that has like 75 boxes of Trump 2020 flags in your garage right now.
Just put that Calvin and Hobbes peeing logo on the front of it then. You'll still sell them for another year.
Well, I think the process Chesty outlined made perfect sense. Like, get an eye of the regulation, figure out the production, etc. All that makes sense, but figure out if you have a saleable product first. Like, if you're going to do shea butter, there are 1,000 other companies doing shea butter. What's your competitive advantage in that space? Sex toys, what's your competitive advantage in that space? Why should people buy your dildo instead of a womanizer or whatever else is on the market?
Yeah, but they're all coming from China, so it's all commodity. And when you have a commodity, the only way to separate is through branding. There's a reason, like, yeah, the no-name brand versus like Pepsi Cola or Kirkland Signature versus Gucci. They're all made by the same sweatshop. The only difference is Gucci has a brand. So I'd argue, like, I don't know what weight to give any one of those 3 legs of the tripod there, but you kind of have to delve into all of them to some extent. Wouldn't you agree, or am I off base here?
I would say, like, narrow in to what you're thinking of doing as a brand, then start building the brand in parallel while you're doing because that process with regulations, making your own shit, formulating it, dealing with, the various government agencies to have to approve it, arguing with customs if you're importing something that's technically illegal, et cetera, that takes up a lot of time. So when you have that in the pipeline, you can build the brand. But figuring out if you actually have something worth to sell is kind of like the most important thing, because a company without sales is like a girl without a vagina. What's the use for it?
Yeah. I was just going to say, Carl, I mean, the best example that I can think of, particularly with like the cosmetics side of it, it's a hypothetical but not hypothetical question. Does Jeffree Star make his own cosmetics? No,
absolutely not.
He doesn't. The point is that he is a personality who sells cosmetics made by somebody else. So most of these are same thing with like Kylie Jenner. Does she make her cosmetics? I'm sure she's not in Calabasas, California, on the stove, putting together some moisturizer, with a wooden spoon. And that's the thing that I think most people getting into an industry don't understand, is that
nobody makes anything.
For the most part, a lot of these, ingredients that you get are already vetted by something. And the only thing that might be different from one to the other is whether or not it's got the imprimatur of some kind of, fair trade or some other bullshit. So which African women are we exploiting for shea butter? Is it 3 cents more that we're paying these ladies or not? And what kind of free marketing can we get out of it?
And those aren't even legal things you can say. It's like organic. I don't know about in the States or in Europe, but in Canada, organic, it's a meaningless buzzword. Like, there's no official requirement you have to be organic.
Depending
so you can throw that on something.
Here in the States, depending on the state,
fucking hard. Careful with that.
Yeah, depending on where you're at here in the States. Yeah, it can.
Yeah, I think you guys are stepping on each other here.
Yeah, we were. We were like waiting for you.
I guess, yeah, one man's way here. So, Chesty, when does your income made, I'm assuming you mean when does the income you've made by your company turn into taxable income? Is it as simple as not sending funds to a personal account, claiming business expenses to keep taxes low? I'm just doing a side hustle. Taxes are killing me.
Yeah, once you've done a taxable realization, meaning that the funds hit you, you have to pay your share of the taxes. So if you have an operating account for your company and it's chock full of money, but you haven't done any distributions to yourself, or you want to pay those distributions out over a few years if you've had a large um, project come through or something, then that's wise because then you're not individually taxed for the money until you've actually received it.
Yeah, I was going to say, because wasn't
Well,
it, you were
hypothetical here.
saying, okay.
Let's say you're running an event planning business and you have a lot of guys that you're flying in and you're putting them up to partake in this event.
Hmm.
Those are all business expenses that you're not going to be taxed for that as personal income. However, if let's say you grab 2 grand and you run out and buy some cocaine because you want to get every single guy there in a good mood, that counts as a personal expense. It's hard to have the company pay for cocaine.
Well, and that's the biggest danger that you run into with people running sole proprietorships and individual member LLCs is commingling of funds. You can't use the money from the company or the company's accounts for personal uses because then what you end up having is what's called a piercing of the corporate veil, meaning that there's no legal distinction between who you are as a person and the company that you own. And
Right.
all of the protections that would normally go along with that, of having the corporation being your shield against your own personal liability, is dissolved because you've basically said, fuck you to the whole structure by intermingling and mixing your own assets with the assets of your company. Don't do
Which,
that.
which I guess is, yeah, to answer the second super chat here, they combine my career's income and side hustle income. Definitely stop doing that.
Well, if the side hustle income you end up taking that out every time, or you're having 1099s directly issued to you individually instead of to a company that you've created, there is no way to segregate your ordinary job and your side hustle because it appears to the IRS that you are getting paid by another source. I mean, it would be no different if you went into a casino and won at gambling. You're going to receive a 1099 for it, and you're going to have to pay taxes on it because it's directly in your name, and it's not designated to anything else.
Yeah. But that's the thing. Like I said, and you correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe this one's off here. So what I did, my first year, because I wanted to get up to the 30,000 revenue, I was getting paid in U.S. funds. So it made it very easy for me to segregate it. I just made a U.S. based account. All income from that went to there. And my first year, like operating expenses, that came from what do they call it? Like you know how you invest a certain amount of personal income into the company to get it started, like to cover expenses and that at the beginning. I don't. It's not goodwill, but I've drawn a blank right now.
Equity?
What's that? Yes, thank you. Equity.
Oh,
Can't believe
yes.
I'm fucking up on that one. Equity. You know that standard business thing.
Yeah, when
But-
you buy your own shares in your own company, yes.
Yeah, basically. But
Yep.
then yeah, so every piece of revenue though that was coming in from the company for that first bit was segregated into its own account. It wasn't going into my same personal account. And so then I don't have to I'm protected, so when I did register it, then you don't have to resegregate all of that stuff into separate stuff. I know it's just like I said, I'm sure there's more efficient ways to do it, but for me, as long as I can look at a spreadsheet and point at expenses and point at every time money moves and have a clear distinction between corporate money and personal money, I like to think that puts me on better footing than everything in one account, but then, manually having to move pennies around.
Yeah,
But like I said,
an idea too. It's like even my dealer when I was in the States liked to be paid in Bitcoin for that exact reason.
oh yeah, there's the other thing. That's the big thing everybody loves about Bitcoin, because I think everybody talks about Bitcoin being this, that, and the other thing. The best explanations I've heard of it, one, were it's an investment in a fund that shows your lack of trust in the system's sustainability. Like you're basically betting on the decline. And that
Yeah, but at the same time, though,
it's so that you can move money around without government trying to tax you. So it's almost like people want to use
Yeah.
it as a tax evasion product.
yeah, but it is. But let's be honest, though. Like, if shit hits the fan, how the fuck are like people who are living on the fringes of society in like a Mad Max world that they're not accepting Bitcoin, they're accepting penicillin and gold and bullets.
and daughters.
Yes, and goats.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's
Yeah.
what I was thinking with just like the simple index funds. It's like, yeah, I'm basically betting on the Canadian economy. And if that investment goes to shit, my concern is being redrafted into the military, not on how my retirement fund looks. So it's kind of almost like, what are you preparing for? And are you doing it properly?
Yeah, I mean, if electricity goes down completely, there is no place to harvest your millions of internet dollars.
Mm-hmm.
No, I am not an accountant. I am an attorney.
She's an accountant. Why would I hang? Actually, it would be funny if you were an accountant, because I always said when I was doing pickup, that was my go-to job. When people asked what I did, I just said I'm an accountant, so they stopped talking about it. Which, sorry for accountants in the chat.
No, I got the good one from like if you ever watch the show How I Met Your Mother.
Yeah.
There's a
Barney.
character named Barney. Whenever someone asks, "What do you do?" And he just laughs it off.
Just don't ever tell anybody you're an accountant around April, because right then that's when they got questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, you think she's taking you back to your back to her place to have sex? No, she wants you to do her taxes.
Yeah, sons of bitches. All right, so what are we on here with the thing? So tracking and metrics, revenue, cost, and accounting. For the most part, we got that. I guess tax planning, reporting, KPI, and hiring.
Well, we
Yeah.
can do the hiring thing because that was the main thing I wanted to get into. Because like 99% of the time, if you have a successful one-man outfit, don't expand it. Just stick with you. Fuck anyone else.
You mean expanded as in hiring, or you mean expanded as in taking loans?
I mean,
or...
like if you're getting to the point where your one-man side hustle is successful enough that you can afford to hire another person, and you're making a good income from it, don't hire another person. It just then you need HR shit. You need to go through all the codes with employees. You have to keep them on. It's just a pain in the ass to have employees. It's much easier to hire an Indian for like $2 an hour to handle your shipping and receiving.
Yeah, that would be my advice as well. If you can hire people for projects and pay them on a per project basis as independent contractors, as opposed to having full-time or part-time employees where you're charged with withholding taxes for them, reporting those types of things, reporting hours to authorities. Try to avoid that as much as possible. If you can make $250,000 a year by yourself, that's not too bad. Plus, your burden of administration is way lower. If I were to add 2 full-time attorneys, I would, first have to figure out how much I would pay them. I would then have to figure out what their benefits would be. Then I would have to figure out all of the administrative hassles of putting them on a payroll and a payroll system. And then on top of that, I would have to make sure that they get enough work to justify the cost. And then at a certain point, I would have to have them generate work themselves in order to do that. And at some point down the line, they would have a question of, well, if I'm generating the work, you either have to give me equity or I'm going to go off on my own because I have my own client base. Hence the problem of hiring professionals in group settings. We're self-interested to begin with, and then the moment that the person figures out that the work that you're doing is supplementing the bottom line of somebody else to a great extent, they just don't like that. So,
and that's the problem too, because the people who don't realize that tend not to be the good performers anyway. So it's like, if you want to get good stuff hard to keep. Even in Ontario, contracting, that was what people thought the answer would be, right? Well, I'll just hire this guy as a contractor year after year. I don't have to worry about any of that stuff. But because under the guise of workers' protections, there's a law here that if you have a contractor that's worked for 2 years for your company, you are obliged to either fire him or turn him into a full-time employee or like cancel the contract. So even if you think you can get around this by just contracting people out, even then you've got a time limit on it.
You're the best employee I've ever had, but I got to let you go.
Yeah, pretty much.
Blame your constable for this.
And I do find it funny. The legislation was built around protecting workers from being exploited, but all I've ever seen is because most guys in the finance industry, like up in Toronto, they're like, I'm not going to work for salary. It's just 5 banks. We'll float between them all, and I get paid way better as a contractor. But it actually fucks them over because they can't just contract for one company for 10 years. So they constantly have to like redo their entire career every 2 years to a different company back and forth. So it actually has the opposite effect of what they were intending.
Well, it's the same deal with the attorneys we have in consulting. That's why usually people who can generate their own business usually end up not working for anyone, or they end up being a partner with equity. Just on the basis that, okay, at that point, your whole goal is you want to get to that partner with equity level so you can hire people under you and you take a cut of the people who can generate their own business.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you can generate business, it's not a problem. I mean, once you get to a certain level in that industry, you can generate like enough job work for 2 people, and then you hire the other guy and he doesn't generate shit and your salary's cut in half.
Yes, because you just have to know at a certain point what your own bandwidth is as far as handling work and how much you're willing to take on in order to process enough billable hours in a year. I've always found that the best way to do that is to do really good work and just increase your billable hour rate as opposed to billing out more hours. But
at least the one is scalable better than the other one anyway. Unless you can have a time machine.
Right, yeah. I mean, there's only 24 hours available in the day. You know, as my business has increased, my billable hour rate went from 175 to 225 to 250 to $3.25, and now it's around, depending on the work, $350 to $400 an hour. So that's what you get. An attorney with 17 years experience in specialized areas. You're just going to have to pay. It's too bad.
Yeah.
Butte Queen in the chat had a comment too about not getting sued as a sole proprietor. Yeah, that's the whole point of forming
liability,
the limited liability single owner LLC. And also too, if you're a professional and you know that there's a degree of liability that you might incur simply from the job, in the event that you make a mistake or someone perceives that you make a mistake. Get the professional liability insurance. If I'm an attorney, you can technically work without legal malpractice insurance. Not a good idea. If you're a doctor, depending on what you do, if you work out of your own office, you could technically be self-insured. You could either report to people that you have a certain amount of assets to your medical board, or lie about it and not get medical malpractice insurance. Not a good idea.
Just never make a mistake ever.
Right. You could be a contractor who goes out and does general contracting work building homes, and all of a sudden one of your workers falls off a roof, or somebody you subcontract falls off a roof and becomes permanently disabled. You need to have insurance, blanket or umbrella insurance for that company, so you can pay those out instead of them picking up all of your property in order to pay some dude who was hurt on a work site. Be cognizant of the worst case scenario and plan for it accordingly.
Yeah,
insurance is generally cheap compared to, it's like condoms are the insurance of the sexual marketplace. It's a lot easier, a lot cheaper to buy a Trojan than to gamble on the fact that you can pull out in time, because like the liability there is at least 18 years. And it's the same thing with business. Like the insurance is it's like no one likes to pay their insurance, but when shit happens, it's nice that you actually paid for it.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the whole point. Is insurance is against low chance of happening, high impact events, and that's why it's so cheap. Because if you have a 1 in a million chance of a malpractice suit, you got a million doctors into a fund paying $1. Like for you, it's like the dollar makes it's like I'd pay $1 a month easily for $1 million in malpractice insurance, and the insurance company's like, that's great. I'm making $12 million and paying out one a year. It's the whole point of like spreading out risk.
I pay about $500 a month for like 4 sets of insurances. Because I was able to find that if you juggle things a little bit, you can technically have 4 life insurances and 4 disability insurances.
Well, there's some payout on your death. I guess your girl must be loving that.
Well, you can't do that anymore because they kind of fixed that loophole. But pre-existing clients got to carry that forward.
Oh.
So let's say I get disabled, I'll get payouts from 4 different companies.
Fair point.
Yeah,
All right, we'll do a quick. Go ahead, Corey.
Yeah, I do think it is a good idea, like Carl said, to insure yourself too. Long-term, short-term disability insurances are great because I mean, if you're hitting the head and put out for a while, or you lose a hand in a wood chipper accident or something, and your job is to type up documents all day, it's going to affect your bottom line big time.
Well, there was a reason Lloyd's of London had supermodels like insuring their legs, because that is their livelihood, is just their hot bodies. Makes sense.
Well, you remember Nikki Taylor, right?
The Nikki Tutorials girl, or
no. She was an older, now older, but supermodel who was in a really bad car accident, and it basically ripped her face off, and then they had to do a bunch of reconstructive surgeries before she was ever close in appearance to what she was previously. And she got a pay from Lloyd's because she had insured her appearance. I've also known some professional athletes too who have insured their bodies for performance and received payouts after they became incapable of performing their sport. So yeah, I mean, if you want to pay it, there is insurance for just about anything.
fair enough.
It's always nicer to have other people pay the insurance if at all possible, though. So
my thinking was just like,
go ahead, Carl.
No, I was going to say, like, I have some insurance through my current employment, and I've always had that.
Mm-hmm.
But the benefit was I was fairly young when I got these insurances. Like, it would be hard for me to get them at my current age, but when I got them when I was 24, I got a very good deal on it. And every company is like, he's 24. Yeah, we'll give him cheap life insurance. He's not going to die for another fucking 60 years. But there's usually a limit on how much they can raise insurance premiums per year, too, unless you do something that fucks things up.
Yeah,
and disability, I don't care about my life insurance. I'm dead. It's not my problem. The disability insurance is what I'm after. Because, like, what do I care what happens after I'm fucking dead? You can sell my corpse to a necrophiliac for all I give a shit. But the disability,
when you're hobbling along, that's the issue.
Well, like, I don't want to take, like, a 75, 80% pay cut and have to live my life out of being broke the rest of my life because some fucker didn't know how to ride his bike properly on the way to the gym and I accidentally clipped his ass.
Yeah. All right, so here we're almost at the end of this one here. By the way, thank you so much, Chesty, Carl, both of you guys know your time. One man's way. Any business time management wisdom to share? I'll say from a beginner's perspective, the first problem I noticed is you feel guilty that you're working at home, and so you put in 20-hour days to alleviate your guilt. Don't fucking do that. Or if you're going to do that, burn out as quickly as possible so you start to manage your work-life balance better, because there's always another task to do, and when they're your tasks, you're more invested in them. But you got to realize how much time you actually waste at corporate job, and that you don't have to waste it at home. So if there's nothing to do, be somewhere else. Yeah, and I think that's a hard lesson to learn, which is weird because you're not going to hear that from most business people. They always talk about being more productive, and I would just say be more efficient with the productivity you have.
Yeah, here's some also counterintuitive advice though that I think works both in relationships and with business. Uh,
Pregnant pause.
yeah, yeah. A lot of it has to deal with trusting your gut and knowing that you can and you should not feel guilty about saying no to people.
Mhm.
Um, Fact is that a lot of the work that you're going to receive from people is going to be on the expectation that it's done on the cheap, that it has built-in discounts, or that when push comes to shove, you'll be the nicer person and you'll do more for less. And you need to make it abundantly known right from the outset what you charge, how you charge it, and that you will not compromise on what you believe you are worth while doing that work. Um, Bill for everything. So that way, there you can look at it and say, "Hey, can I bill in some fairness here and cut some of this work that you've done?" But never, ever, ever say that anything that you've done for a client or to get the job done properly was done unnecessarily, because it never is. Um, and that includes project work. Never underbid yourself. Never undersell yourself.
Ooh.
If you end up charging more than your competitor to do the work and they go with the other person, that's not your fault. That's the fault of the other person, more likely than not underbidding for the work. So do not discount yourself or your skills simply to get more work. It's never worth it in the end.
I can double vouch for that. Oh my god, even just a simple thing like an online consult, the difference between a client that's willing to pay $50 and one that's willing to pay 300, night and day. Even aside from like the overwork, the client tends to value it more the more you charge. The client who's invested more in it is more likely to actually do the things that you want them to do. It's just I can't think of a single negative in not undercharging for your work. Like other than maybe you have to pay rent that month and you maybe have to take a cut, that level of desperation, that's the only one I can think of.
I'd say the main thing, like if I had to give one advice, it's to be very, very cold-hearted.
Ooh.
Just on the basis that it goes into what Chesty was saying, because he's very much on point with never underselling yourself. But I just put in our private DM chat that I had a guy who just emailed me, and I'm not going to share the name or anything, but the guy was like, I'll pay you $100 for a 1 hour consult. I'll send you like an exhaustive life story. I'll send you everything I want help with beforehand. And that means, okay, it sounds like I'm making $100 for an hour. I'm not really, because I'm going to have to put in time to read his backstory. I'm going to have to look into what he wants help with, and I'm going to have to connect the two, and I'm going to spend like at least like 2-3 hours prepping for that call.
Yeah, usually.
So that means I'm basically making about, if I'm generous, about 8% of my normal hourly billable rate.
There you are with the opportunity cost.
So if I'm doing that, it means that I'm personally invested in the person doing it, or I'm having a charitable moment. And one, I don't know who the fuck this person is, and two, I haven't had that much to drink yet. And I think the whole thing about knowing how much you're worth and not compromising that. And I would also add, like, be uncompromising in the advice you give people. Like, don't get personal. Don't get emotionally involved. But if you're cold, you're rational, and they can disagree with how you said something, but they can't disagree with the content. No one ever got fired over that unless they work for a certain someone. Like all clients they hire external consultants or lawyers or whatever to tell them what their own employees aren't telling them.
It's kind of funny when you think about it that way.
Well, no one's going to tell their own boss, who they depend on for their salary increase, that you're incompetent at running this shit. An external consultant can do that, and the boss will thank them for it.
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking from like a relationship perspective, how much better, like I know Chesty will vouch for me on this one, how much better your relationship gets when you stop placating your girl and just start being honest. Like, I'll make you cry, but I'm not going to lie to you. And it's just funny because it's so counterintuitive that nobody does it. And in that one realm, it actually works very well. But in the corporate sense, your boss will just eventually fire you because you hurt his feelings. So you kind of can't. Like, I get the idea of not doing it, but it's just funny. We made a whole business out of paying somebody to lie to you because you paid somebody else not to lie to you.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
yeah. Looking back at it, I mean, you would be surprised how much traction you get for ruthless consistency as opposed to kind inconsistency. That's how I kind of look at it.
That's a clever way of putting it. I like that.
Yeah, I mean, if somebody comes to you and they're like, "Well, I got this work done by this guy and it was fantastic," but in the beginning he was kind of an asshole because he had some very high expectations of me as a client, and I wasn't sure how to handle that, but we never had any issues because he was always completely honest with me from the very beginning, and you know. It ended up being a much fairer price than I had originally thought it would be because he came directly out front and never sugarcoated anything and told me that if I had additional things that I wanted added or additional questions to answer or phone calls to take, that I was going to get charged. And that's the issue is if you waffle around and have this covert contract with your client that he's not going to expect extra things from me if I'm nice to him. Well, what the fuck? You're providing a service. I mean, people are always going to ask things from you. So to put the onus on the customer to be responsible for their own purchase in some ways, I think is a smart thing to do as a business owner. To say, look, you came to me. If you don't trust what I'm doing, I understand that I'm an attorney, but I'm more like a plumber than I am a doctor. You can hire somebody else to do the same shit if you really want to. I don't need this fucking aggravation. So, it goes both ways.
And my thing was always usually when you start out, you want to be nice to clients. So a client calls you at night, you're not doing anything else. You take his call, you don't bill him for it. Now he expects you to take his calls when he calls you at 8 o'clock on a Saturday and to actually not bill him for it.
Oh, which is the worst? And you can't blame anybody else for it either because you basically let your boundaries be known. Yeah, you can call me at 3 a.m. I think there's a validation seeking aspect to it too that really guys need to kind of quash.
Yeah, and I talked about earlier, I've had drinks with my attorney and I've had drinks with my accountant, etc. But that's on the basis of me being a long-term customer and actually getting along with them. So we'll go out and have a drink together. And it's kind of understood. I'm not going to ask them for legal advice or accounting advice while we're having that drink. We're just shooting the shit.
Yeah, well, same as you segregated your finances from corporate to personal. You're segregating your relationship from business to that. Military was great for that, by the way. You could always tell. You can joke around with your coworkers. It was always, hey, John, hey, Jimmy. But as soon as you addressed them by rank, you knew that wall went up, and it made things very easy to deal with in a professional setting, which I haven't seen since, which is kind of annoying. It's one thing I miss.
Yeah, another thing, too, is family can really throw a wrench into your business life too. You got to be careful of that, and I don't mean your close family. I'm talking about extended family. I always remember the first family reunion where I shut down the whole ask me for free advice bullshit. That just ain't fucking happening. You get 20 people come up to you that you haven't seen in 15 years, asking you how to set up a trust and cut out one of the cousins from a will or some bullshit. And I'm like, look, hold on a second. For one thing, I don't deal with any of that stuff, and secondly, even if I did, I don't give anybody free advice. And is there a friends and family discount? I'm like, maybe. I said, if you came at me in a way that made sense, but making the assumption that I'm just going to do shit for you for free is the wrong way to go about it. And it always starts that way. It's like, oh, but we're family. I'm like, okay, well, do I go to your job and ask for free, French fries? No, fuck off. That's not how it works.
I actually like that one better than do I go to your job and slap the dicks out of your mouth?
No, but I actually took that to the furthest way I could possibly go because one of my relatives is a plumber.
Oh yeah.
And he kept asking me for free advice, and it was kind of early on, so it was always kind of helpful. And then I just called him up and be like, hey, remember all that free advice I've given you? And he's like, yeah, I really appreciate it. Well, you can show me how much because my septic tank just broke. Could be here Monday.
Hey, did he come by?
Yeah, to his credit, he did, which is why I still have a familial relationship with him.
Well, I was gonna say you basically told him right there. How good a family member are you anyway? And he's like, yeah, we're good. A lot of family backs off on that stuff too, and I'm actually surprised how many field reports I'd see from guys who had these covert contracts with their family where they think there's some kind of familial equity. I helped them all, and now that I need their help, they're just gone. It's always a lower economic quintile I've noticed too that has that kind of attitude. At least until the will comes up, then the rich guys, that's when they start getting cutthroat.
Well, to be honest, though, the funny thing is, I very rarely see the well-off people in my family ask for free advice. Usually, that's more of a quid pro quo thing. One of the guys in my family who's in finance will be like, "Hey, you want to get in on?" He'll call me up and be like, "You want to get in on these 3 companies? Look them up," or I'll call him on something.
Right.
Usually always the people in the family who are doing the worst who want the most free shit because oh, you're doing well, you can afford to give us free shit, and
that's why I'm doing well, because I can't afford to give you free shit.
Well, if there was one phrase short of I fucked your brother that's a reason for cutting someone out of your life, it's fuck it, you can afford it. It's you don't get to make that determination about what I can and can't afford.
All right, well, here, let's leave it at that. I already got you guys 8 minutes over. We're going to go down to Troy's channel for Rule 0. I think, what is he talking about? It's the post-COVID game or the future of game. I'd have to go check the title. Let's go check his channel. Again, Chesty, I know your time comes at a premium, and you do way more, and you put way more into this than you ever get out of it. So, heartfelt, thank you, and I'm saying that publicly. Ian, sorry, man, we're out of time. I can't answer this. I guess just a quick 30-second thing. Service affordable and accessible to people. Don't worry about accessible or affordable. Worry about.
I'll answer this for him real quick. Okay.
Good.
Survey other people in your area who do the exact same thing that you're planning on doing, and then judge their skill and competence to yours, and then adjust up or down accordingly. That's it.
Oh, fair enough.
All business and all relationships are local.
Ooh, I like that. All right, so any closing thoughts, guys, before I shut the stream down?
I'm good.
All right, I'll take that as a no. Anyways, guys, thanks. We'll see you on Troy's channel in a bit.